That's great. Thank you very much, Ian. Hopefully everybody can hear me and see the slides here. If there's any problems, you can let us know. So it's great to be talking to you tonight about some psychology in snow sports coaching. As you can see, the actual subtitle of the presentation this evening is Flowing with Mindfulness. And a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is about my dissertation research from Masters in Applied Positive Psychology, which I completed last year, 2019. So that's what I'm going to be talking mainly about tonight. So just to get the slides to work, here we go. So yes, as Ian was saying, he was telling you about my background with Snowsport Scotland, and I've been involved with a number of other organisations, which I've got the logos up for here. And I've had various roles with these organisations. With BASI, for example, I was a trainer for 15 years, but I was also very involved with the development of course resources and with the sort of teaching and learning side of the organisation. I was also involved with IASI, which I'm sure many of you will know. I was head of education for IASI from 1999 to 2019, so a good 20-year stint in that role. And during that time, I was involved with really writing the system and getting the qualifications recognized better around the world, and attending various World Interski Congresses to help make the qualifications better known. I'm also been a ski instructor for a lot of that time, just teaching good old regular people how to ski, and I run British Alpine Ski School out here in Saint-Gervais, where I'm speaking to you from tonight. We've been doing that since 2005, but obviously I worked lots of other places before that. So as I said, I went to Bucks New University back in 2016, partly maybe a midlife crisis, having turned 50. So I went and did a master's degree in applied positive psychology, but I've always been interested in psychology as well as sort of sports psychology and how people learn. So it was a really great course to go and do. And I also run Parallel Dreams Coaching Academy, which I'll explain a little bit more about shortly. And the reason I've got the Irish Interski team up there is because that was sort of involved with my university research, which I'll get to shortly. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be talking about to you this evening. As Ian said, if people have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box, but I'm also happy for you to come on and speak to me. We're also going to do a few little polls which we organized, so keep you awake, hopefully during the session. But I'm going to be, first of all, talking to you about what I would describe as the Learn, Enjoy, Flow and Grow coaching method, which we developed within Parallel Dreams Coaching Academy. And so you can see how that's relevant to the study that I did in university. But before I get into the study, I want you to get some grasp of what mindfulness and flow are, and particularly how they relate to sport. So I'll be interested to find out from you as a group how much you know about mindfulness and flow as we go through the session this evening. And then after that, I'm going to talk about the research study in some detail, look at the research question, the aim of the project, what my training program was, the participants involved in it, method and results. And this will be actually the first time I've spoken to any group like this about the results of my research, because when I presented about it at the Interski Congress in March of 2019, I was only telling the audience at that point what I was doing as my research, because I had no results at that point. And then crucially for everybody tonight, I want to look at what the implications are from the study findings for coaching and learning, and hopefully you'll find something interesting in that for yourselves. Okay. Right, before we get into that though, I just want to have a little reflection on some of the other sessions that you've hopefully been involved in. So I looked at the recording of Russell Earnshaw's creative coaching. I wasn't able to actually attend it. And what I've put up here on the slide is a couple of things I picked out from his session. which he said creative coaching was about. So you can see that I've said it's about people's confidence, it's about growing, being part of a team, it's about belonging, and it's about connection. And he said that creative coaching means trying different things. So I want you to keep that in mind as I go through the presentation. And then Christy McKinnon obviously did a great presentation about Jean Cotte's work on transformational coaching, and the long-term outcomes were particularly of interest, the performance, participation, and personal development. So what I really want you to think about is whether what I present to you this evening could in some way contribute to both being more creative in your coaching or being more transformational in your coaching. So I'll come back to this at the end of the presentation. Okay, so learn, enjoy, flow, and grow. What's it all about? Well, first of all, I'd say that all of us are learners, no matter what role we're engaged in. So it doesn't matter whether we're teaching, coaching, leading, whether we're a competitive athlete, participant, we're all learning. And what the Learn, Enjoy, Flow and Grow method provides is a way of people either self-coaching or using it to coach others. And where it came from was we introduced the Learn It, Love It, Live It philosophy when we went to the Interski Congress in 2015 in Argentina. And we carried that through to 2019. And if anybody did read the document that I sent out beforehand, you'll have seen that I call the document 3 Steps to Wellbeing. The 3 steps being learn it, love it, and live it. Okay, so you can get more information about that on our website. Okay. And a bit of self-promotion here. I do a book coming out, hopefully at the end of October. And it is titled Learn, Enjoy, Flow and Grow. And it's obviously taking my positive psychology learnings and applying it to passion and meaning in life. And this evening, we're going to focus on the flow part of that. And in particular, chapter 10, which describes more about my research dissertation. So, mindfulness. I'm sure lots of you have heard about it. It's quite a buzzword these days. I must admit, when I first came across mindfulness, when I was on my university course, I didn't actually think that much of it. I thought it was all a little bit sort of woo-woo, but strange. I thought that people like to use the term all the time in conversations as if they somehow seemed more educated or something. So it's become a real common word that seems to be, I say, overused. However, as I started to look at it in a little more detail and looked at how it was being used in sport, I started to sort of think again. So I've got 2 definitions here. The first one is probably the most well-known definition. If you go onto any Google search, you'll come across Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he is kind of the person who brought mindfulness to the Western world from its kind of Eastern roots. And the key thing about mindfulness is it's about paying attention in a particular way. It says there's 3 ways you can do that. It's on purpose, it's present moment, and it's non-judgmental. I'd say for me, the non-judgmental is the bit that's really difficult for people. Being in the present moment is also difficult for people, especially with our fast-paced life these days. But it's also quite an important aspect in terms of when we're talking about flow, that the attention is on purpose rather than just sort of haphazard. However, the second definition is somewhat different, and this comes from Ellen Langer, a Harvard University professor, and she talks about it being a flexible state of mind where we're actively engaged in the present and noticing things. So she really talks about mindfulness more in a way that it's about applying it to how we learn. So it's a little bit different to the first definition, which is more about how we might meditate. I think a lot of people think of mindfulness and meditation as being one and the same. Meditation, there are many forms of meditation. Mindfulness is one way of meditating. Okay, so mindfulness can also be applied in other ways to daily activities that we do and to how we learn as well. Okay, so it's definitely not just meditation. So mindfulness in sport. And the first thing I'd say is it has become an important training tool within sport for sports psychologists and coaches. Because, again, the key thing is it helps to keep people in the present moment and less judgmental about what they're doing. I would also say, though, that mindfulness, I'm not even suggesting to you this evening that you should use mindfulness instead of other sports psychology approaches. I would suggest that it's something you can use alongside as an additional tool. It also fits, as I said, with skill acquisition. And I brought it into the diamond model of skill acquisition that we use within the Irish Association of Snowsports Instructors. So it fits into that model quite well. In reality, it also fits this mindful learning approach very well with this sort of discovery teaching styles, because you're more open to experience and novelty, and you're more creative and hence discovering as you learn. A couple of other people or one in particular, Amy Balsell, has done some great work on producing mindfulness programs for use in sport, and that this had some influence on the program that I developed. So she's come up with the mindfulness meditation training in sport, and they have come up with a good book she wrote with Joshua Summers, I think it was. I can share some of these links with you afterwards. And it is just titled Mindfulness Meditation Training in Sport. So at this point, I'm going to just have a slight pause. I'm going to move it on to the next slide. And I would like to invite any questions or clarification about mindfulness before I move on. But I think, and he was also going to just do the first poll. And what I'd like to find out from you is, do you currently use mindfulness in your coaching practice? Okay, so that's our kind of number one poll. So you'll have a few moments to answer that. So while you're sort of doing that, I'm going to move on to talking about flow next. So flow. This first little paragraph is a direct quote from my forthcoming book. So the first thing which is really important, is flow is a mental state. It's not a physical thing. Okay, so it's a if you like, an optimal experience or an altered state of consciousness that people can experience. And it tends to occur when somebody's fully immersed in an activity that's challenging. The challenging aspect is really important because if the activity isn't challenging, people don't tend to experience flow. There is a chap called Stephen Kotler, and again, there's another link I can share with you afterwards, he's written a number of books, but he has a thing called the Flow Research Collective, which looks at, as he calls it, hacking flow. And he recently put up a slide saying that the challenge that people would perceive it as being 4% greater than their available skills. Now, I have no idea where the 4% came from, but the general thing is that the challenge is perceived as being slightly greater than their available skills. Whether it's 4% or not, I have no idea, but it's slightly more. And the great thing about flow is the experience leads to, feelings of enjoyment, satisfaction, it's euphoria, and it's a rewarding experience, and it really can help you to grow and to learn more, especially because you're stretching your available skills. It can really push you outside your comfort zone. So flow's been researched since the early 70s. This nice little name here, Mahidi Csikszentmihalyi. If you want to pronounce that, I've made it really easy for you, because you just break it down into Csikszentmihalyi in brackets there. I got the pleasure of meeting him, the great man himself, when I was at the World Positive Psychology Conference in Montreal in 2017. So he's quite an old man, as you can see, from Hungary. And he came through some pretty tough times during the Second World War and ended up in America, where he's lived the majority of his life as a psychologist. So again, flow has been, associated with sport for a long time. It's been researched in sport, and it's quite often just spoken about in the same way as peak performance. What I would say is that flow and peak performance are not exactly the same thing. As I said, flow is a mental state, whereas peak performance in terms of sport involves both the mental and the physical. However, getting into a flow state means that there's quite a high possibility that you're going to perform at a really good level and potentially at your peak. So as it says there, it's been suggested that entering a flow state is a precursor for peak performance. So a couple of people who've been heavily involved in researching flow: Susan Jackson, Australian lady. She really through the 90s has developed a lot of tools for measuring flow, questionnaires and so forth, and done a lot of work with Csikszentmihalyi himself. And then more recently, I think Christian Swan is also Australian, as it happens. And he's looked more at the difference between flow state, where attention becomes effortless during the performance, and he's also looked at where there's a lot more effort involved in performing to a high level, and he's called that the clutch state. So the difference being that somebody who experiences flow will tend to come out of that experience on a high with euphoria and great feelings, whereas somebody who has to perform to a high level without entering flow will tend to come out of it more exhausted. So that's the sort of, he's been looking at these two different states. Okay. So that's a little bit of background on flow and on mindfulness. And again, I'm going to invite any questions. So I don't know if anybody's putting any questions, Ian, in at all about anything just yet.
That's results from the polls just there.
Okay, so that's the first one, is it? So yeah, we have,
that's the first one, yeah.
Right, 9 people saying that they do use mindfulness. Brilliant. Okay. And then 12 saying no, and 11 not sure. Okay, pretty good. So we'll do another little poll as well at this point. So, and a nice simple one here is basically on, again, based on what I've just explained to you in terms of flow. Do you think you've experienced it? So have you experienced flow before? And again, yes, if you think you have, no, or if you're not sure, then again, go for that one. So we'll find out the results of that shortly. Okay. Any other questions at this point? Anybody coming in with anything?
Yep, from James P. The comment is, so a flow state entered when not physically doing anything, question mark?
Yes, because it could be a mental activity like, say, playing chess or writing a novel. So you can experience flow in lots of different activities and domains. But obviously we're interested in it from a performance, sports performance point of view this evening. But yeah, it's a mental engagement in a task, whatever that task might be. Yeah, great question, James. Thanks.
And from Callum Shepherd, Eric, is flow more of a training tool, or is it something that you think would be beneficial in competition as well?
Okay, nice question. Yeah, I think a lot of athletes, a lot of flow research has been done by interviews where people have, given their experience of how they've been performing. And so I would say a lot of top level athletes would say they experience flow in competition. So it definitely is something, a desirable state to achieve during competition. But I would also say, yes, it is hopefully, from what you see this evening, it is also a training tool in that it's a state that we want to try and achieve during training, as well as more competitive or high pressure performances. Right.
Okay, slightly passing comment, but a comment from Smart Ski, which is, it's hard to pass comment on flow if one doesn't fully understand what it is. Hence, at the moment, I'm not sure whether I use it. And I'll move on from that one to the next one, which is from Angela, which is if 4% above skill in elite athletes, is this rate limiting?
Okay, well, I think the first thing is the percentages, I said I saw that put down, and I did wonder myself where that figure came from, because I've never seen it in any of Csikszentmihalyi's literature. So I don't know where the number came from. But I think it's more of a subjective perception that the challenge is slightly greater than the skills, rather than necessarily being the case. So it's the perception that you need to get outside or pushes you outside of your comfort zone. But great, thanks for the other question. I like the fact that people have said that they're not entirely sure what flow is. Hopefully, as we go through tonight, we'll get a little bit more of an understanding of that. But I think that's perfectly understandable as well for people to say, yeah, maybe I'm not entirely sure what this is yet.
Another question from James P. Is there any information on how long this can be maintained? For example, a whole day's snowboarding, or would it be more akin to a single run at a time?
Yeah, another great question. I think it depends on the activity. Sometimes I think people will talk about moving in and out of flow state within a performance. It could certainly last for a whole run, but again, depends on the activity, because if I was talking about something like a purely mental type activity where you were engaged in, something at your computer that was really interesting, the whole afternoon might disappear and you never realized the time at all. You didn't even realize you were hungry, and that would constitute being in a flow state as well. So I think the time can vary greatly depending on the activity. Good.
And from Gary, APC, is flow the same as self-actualization?
No, but flow could help lead to self-actualization, because some of the suggested byproducts of flow are that it helps you to have less of an ego, or to get beyond your ego a little bit, and it helps you to grow as an individual. So hence why it's a desirable state. So it can certainly help with leading towards self-actualization.
Derek, and before I move on to the next one, I'm sure there's a couple of people thinking, well, what is self-actualization?
Yeah, that's good. Well, that comes from Abraham Maslow, who was a humanistic psychologist of the 60s. And it was the idea that he talked about peak experiences, which are quite similar to flow, but he talked about that as being part of the individual growing. So somebody who self-actualizes would be somebody who sort of moves right up Maslow's hierarchy of needs to the top tier. So if you're familiar with Maslow and this hierarchy of needs, then that's what we're talking about there.
Okay, from Simon Bates, have any studies been performed using functional MRI, see if there is a physical change in the brain when people experience flow?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this area, so I won't pretend to be, but there are more studies being done, with neuroscience type activities to look at brain activity for people in flow. So that's certainly becoming more common. And that's where this guy, Stephen Kotler, and the Flow Research Collective that I mentioned earlier is quite interested in sort of the neuroscience side of it. So yes, there are some, things being done and moving in that direction. There's another chap, I'm trying to remember his name now. He's come up with another theory. It's a horrible and transient hypofrontality theory. Arne Dietrich, that's his name. And he talks about how things change in the brain when people move into a flow state. I'm not going to name different parts of the brain because I'll just I'll muddle myself up if I do. So, but yes, basically there's some studies being done.
Okay, and from Will Nettleton, would it be fair to say flow is a combination of concentration and relaxation?
An interesting question. It's definitely concentration, but yes, I think there is an element of that concentration becoming in a sense, relaxed, because the attention changes as people, it becomes a more effortless attention is the general, what happens in flow. So yeah, I think I would say yes to that.
The next question, Derek, I suspect you may come on to, but from Rachel, how can we use flow in coaching and improving the performance of others?
Okay, well, I'd maybe hold on that one, because I guess some of that will hopefully come out through what I'm going to present. So
okay, and they're still coming, Derek, if you're okay for me to continue.
Yeah, no, it's okay for a minute. I'll need to watch my time, but yeah, we're okay at the moment.
Again, from Smartsky, elite climbers often comment they are able to stay in this state for extended periods of time, probably due to the understandable need for absolute concentration.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that the big thing about flow is where there's danger and risk, then people tend to experience flow very easily. So extreme sports are an obvious thing where people experience flow. And, where you need that concentration to be, something like climbing, and if you go free solo or something like that, then you're definitely going to make sure your attention is totally focused on the task at hand and not wavering anywhere else. So yeah, I would definitely say people would be able to hold it for an extended period of time in situations like that.
And Duncan has nearly wrapped it up by saying he's very interested because he's worried about his golf blowouts and ski crashes to hear how we can maintain this. And I'll move on to the final question at the moment, which is from Nikki Jordan. Have you any advice on how we can recapture an athlete into a flow state when they're having a difficult period?
Okay. Again, I suppose I'll just say with that one, let's look at the stuff that I've done and see if that goes some way towards answering that kind of question. But yeah, brilliant. Some great questions there. So lots of interest in flow then, I can see, so far, which is brilliant. So shall I move on, Ian, at that point?
Yep, there's no more questions at the moment. And Neve, have you put the poll up for the second poll?
Having some technical issues, so I'll put it up in a second.
Okay, that's fine. There's no rush on that anyway, so we can just find the answer to that. But that was just whether people had felt they'd experienced flow before. Okay, so this is my research question. So I wanted to know, can developing the skill of focused attention for alpine ski instructors while ascending using ski lifts by teaching them mindfulness strategies foster more flow experiences while descending the slopes and performing. The reason I came up with this was simple, because I found that there was obviously some synergy between mindfulness and flow. Obviously, both of them were about being present moment focused. Both of them required you to focus your attention. But there was also some, contradictions in that mindfulness seemed to be much more about focusing attention in a very purposeful and perhaps effortful way. But what I wanted to really find out was if we trained people using mindfulness to get better at focusing their attention, could this then have a knock-on effect of them experiencing flow more easily or more readily when actually performing? The reason I put in using ski lifts there was because as a ski instructor for all these years and as a trainer of ski instructors, as a coach, etc., I was obviously being an alpine skier, we use the lifts all the time. I know that might not be everybody on the call tonight, but I've over the years experienced that some people and some instructors and coaches use lift riding time very effectively with their learners, and others perhaps see it as a time to switch off and have a break. But also from the learner's perspective, lift riding time can either be productive or could be quite negative. And many learners will get into a sort of downward negative spiral while they're on the lifts. So it can be a real time for anxiety as well. So I thought I'd sort of get two things here. I'd use the time productively to train mindfulness, but I would also make better use of the lift riding time. So that was the basis of it. So the reason I wanted to do this, as you'll see from the sort of aim of the project, was to try and use mindfulness to develop the skill of focused attention in a group of alpine ski instructors during both training sessions and performances, and particularly in high pressure environments, with a goal of creating more flow experiences. And I suppose what I was hoping is, if this works, if it's successful, then it might be more used by organizations such as Snowsports and other organizations within the coach education process, so that people actually think about how to structure lift riding time and how they could potentially create more flow experiences in their learners, and this could have a knock-on effect to the people that they work with.
Derek, just in case you can't see it, Neve has just put the question up.
Yeah, I've just seen that. I'm just going to clear it off the screen now. So that's the aim of the project. So based on that, then obviously what did I do? So John Kabat-Zinn, who I mentioned before, who had the sort of first definition of mindfulness there, he came up with a nice little program called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, which was all about helping patients and people with more serious kind of illnesses to reduce stress and anxiety. So I thought I'd go down the same line of coming up with a sort of name like that. So I came up with mindfulness-based skiing specific intervention. Bit of a mouthful, but that's what I decided the program was going to be. And the basis was that I would have some meditative activities, sort of more the John Kabat-Zinn type approach. And I would also have some what I would call mindful communication activities. And so that would cater for the fact that when we're riding the lift, you could be completely on your own, or you could be with other people that you don't know, so you're more in your own space, or you could be communicating with people that you do know as you're riding the lift. So I was going to have two sets of activities. So I'll go into what each of these sets of activities were. So the meditative activities are listed there as follows: 5 different activities. All meditations, start with focusing on the breath. So very simple, just starting to focus on the in and out breath and seeing if you could actually keep your attention on that. Normally what happens to people is it keeps moving away from that, and they have to keep coming back to it. So people get distracted all the time. Okay, so that would be just the starting point. Then the second activity was looking at, where are people noticing the breath? Was it more in the nostrils, throat, chest, etc.? And then the third one was, what were people actually hearing in their environment as they were riding the lift? People, might want to close their eyes on the lift, but if they didn't feel comfortable doing that, they might want to simply just look down at the snow if on a drag lift, or just kind of, focus on one point ahead of them and just listen to what was happening in the environment. Then the fourth one, mindful observation. Interestingly enough, most people found this quite hard, being ski coaches and instructors, because the idea here was that you could observe what was going on in the environment without being judgmental. And I think analyzing performance is kind of in our nature, so it's quite hard not to be judgmental when observing. And then the fifth one, which sounded a little bit kind of nicey, maybe we're back to that woo-woo stuff again. The gratitude ride was about just being thankful for everything that, was going on, that you were appreciating in that present moment while you were riding the lift. And that, interestingly, was one that people really liked. So they were the 5 meditative activities. And then there was 5 communication activities. And these were, first one, really important one, was just really properly listening to people. And you'll see some really interesting stuff on this when we bring the results out later. Being more thoughtful about the content of your conversation. The questioning, obviously, as coaches and instructors, we're usually pretty good at asking questions, but really thinking about the types of questions we're asking, and whether it was, initiating change in the person that you were asking the question of, which is what appreciative inquiry is about. And then also being aware of the language that you were using as well in the mindful talking. So not being overly technical, not trying to use big words just to show off. So being conscious of that. And then the fifth one, again, really interesting one, was mindful companions. So getting people to really think about who they were riding the lift with and why, and whether that person was helping them to uplift them, make them more positive, or whether that person was dragging them down. And even if it was somebody they perhaps didn't want to ride the lift with, were they better able to handle that situation? So they're the two sets of activities. And I did try these activities out on myself a number of times. So the whole program developed over time while I was at university, before I actually used it for my research itself. So I don't know if there's any questions about that. If there are any burning questions, then I can certainly take them. But again, you may want to ask questions at the end about the activities, I'm sure.
Just one comment, Derek. I'm sure it's only, but it's about perhaps being mindful in trying to survive the lift in Cairngorm on a storm during a storm.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And there'd be plenty of sounds in the environment there, I suppose. Yeah, it's a while since I've been on the lifts in the Scottish Highlands, so I've got soft living out in the Alps. Yeah. That's what happens. We get days like the one in the picture here in Pila in Italy, one of our training camps for the Interski Congress. So as you can see from the photograph here, the study participants were the Irish Interski demonstration ski team, 10 members, alpine skiers, and they were very kindly my participants for my research. They, as a group, they're all full-time professionals in the industry, all teaching skiing, with a British team freestyle coach in there as well. We've got race coach in there, sort of full-time race coach, and ski instructors. Age range from about 24 to 53, I think. So a good sort of age range, but it's probably slightly more towards the mature end of it. So they were the participants. And obviously, as participants, they were their primary goal was to get ready for the Interski Congress and to ski at the Congress and do demonstrations on the hill in front of reasonably large crowds. So it's certainly a high pressure environment, which was something that I was looking for, that they had to build up to. And it's fair to say that as a group, although they're all really good skiers, they had never been to an event like this, so they didn't do lots of synchro type skiing. And that's where some of the other nations who go to the likes of Interski are way behind the Swiss, who it's a national pastime for every ski school in Switzerland has a demo team, and they all compete sort of regionally and nationally against each other. So not surprising, the Swiss are pretty good. But so there was a big learning curve in many ways for this team. So this is just going into a little bit about the design of the research. So there was a quantitative side to it. So I used a questionnaire both before the training and at the end of the training to basically test two things: their overall disposition to experience flow, and also whether their focus attention skills changed over that time as well. So that was the goal there. So they completed the questionnaire in those two time periods, November 2018 and March 2019. So the second time they completed the questionnaire was just before the start of the Congress. We'd already been in Bulgaria training at that point. So the activities themselves, they could download onto their phone. They're just PDF documents, so they could look at each of the 5 activities for the meditative or communication, prior to getting on the lift, just to remind themselves what they were. I did actually also make recordings of the meditated ones, which they could use if they wanted to listen to my voice as they started riding the lift, and then they would just carry on doing the activity, because I just do a short little intro to it. Crucially, they were also asked to use the activities in their own professional snow sports life. So when they're out teaching and working, and also in their everyday life away from the snow sports environment, and to keep a training log on that. And that's quite interesting from some of the things that came out later on. Okay. So the second part of the research was the qualitative side. And this is where 5 of the 10 members were interviewed in what's called semi-structured interviews. And that was going to really look at, again, their experiences of flow, their focus attention, and also their general experience of using the activities and how they found those activities. So there's 5 40-minute interviews done afterwards. So results. So as far as the quantitative side was concerned, the first thing to say is that in any quantitative study, you normally have a lot more participants than 10. So it's a very small sample size, but it was still interesting to get the results to find out if things had changed from time 1 to time 2. And happily there was significant, statistically significant change in both their overall flow and their focus attention skills. I would sort of put in a little bit of caution here because we had no control group. It was just the one group. So, the reality is you could perfectly well argue that a team training together from November to March are going to get better unless something goes wrong. They're going to get better at skiing together, at working together. So, it's possible they would have experienced more flow even without the training program that I introduced. But that's where I think the interviews were also very useful to back up what people's experiences were. So that was the results from part 1. So I'm going to go into quite a lot more depth about the results from part 2. Okay, so 6 themes were derived from it. The first one, not surprisingly, was all about focusing attention and maintaining and losing it. Is how I term that one. So that's the one I'll probably talk about most, but I will touch on the other themes that came out as well. So second one was how useful the training activities were and the benefits. Third one was what I've termed mindful awareness throughout the journey, and the journey I'm talking about is the training journey and the event itself. So from when the team got together to performing at the Congress. And team bonding. Obviously, that was quite important that would happen. So that's another theme that came out. Then the 5th theme was about emotions and the fact that people experience both positive and the negative emotions and how the mindfulness activities impacted that. And then finally, some general feedback and some criticism about the activities. Not surprisingly, not everybody was into it as much as others, as I think we always find in any coaching that we do.
Derek, I wonder if I could jump in there with a quick question that came
from, course, yeah.
Which was simply, how was flow measured?
Well, flow was measured through the questionnaire. So the questionnaire that was used was a well-known dispositional flow questionnaire. So that was measuring, it's a questionnaire that's been used many, many times in lots of studies. So that was one measurement. And then obviously the way the questions were phrased in the semi-structured interviews was also a way of teasing out what or how people had experienced flow. So yes, there was a quantitative element, which was the kind of real, I suppose, the scientific bit, if you want to call it that, and then the interviews, which were giving the more qualitative data. Was that your question, Ian? Or was that coming from somebody else?
No, that was from Callum Shepherd.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so moving on then to theme 1, which was, as I said, maintaining or losing it. So the kind of terminology that was coming out from the interviews were terms, as you see there, like focus attention, engagement, present moment attention, beam of energy, soft vigilance, attention becoming ordered. These are all the kind of things that were in different transcripts. And I've just got one comment from one participant here, which relates to the fact that they found focusing their attention harder during the training camps, and that it became easier as the event approached and at the event itself when they were there and they had to do it. Again, there's an element there. You think, well, people will focus their attention more when there's more urgency about it. And I suppose going back to some people's questions about flow earlier as well, where you're, doing something that has an element of danger, then it's not surprising that you tend to focus your attention where the stakes are higher. So there was an element of that coming through from that response. So looking at a sort of sub-theme of that first theme and the kind of mental state that people were in when they were in flow. Again, some of the words that came out of that were zoned in, zoned out, dialed in sync, on autopilot, being in a bubble, which is quite an interesting one, arousal levels, and experiencing deep involvement. And there's a couple of quotes here about that. People said they were really 100% focus. Actually felt very much like skiing a bubble down the hill, like I was in my own tunnel vision. Again, that's obviously also to point out that these interviews were done after Interski itself, after the team had performed at the Congress. So it's sort of taking in both the training period and the event itself. Another comment was I couldn't recollect the run, any of the run on that piste, referring to the demo hill. And to that extent, it was a blank. So really quite interesting. They were so absorbed in what they were doing that they just couldn't remember it. And I think if I remember back to some of the transcript, it was that they only start to remember when they came off the demo hill and noticed everybody at the bottom. Okay, so the second thing that came out, which was really interesting, was that the activities had become a really important part of people's pre-performance routine, or what we call pre-competition strategy. So they were starting to use the activities, not just on the lifts, of course, but also while they were hanging around waiting for their performance, or in the moment just before the performance. And that's what that first quote talks about, is how they were using the kind of mindfulness activities to calm them down and get completely focused in on the run just in the moments before going. And then the other, and I think this quote was from the same person, was that, once they were actually in the run, that they sort of talk quite differently about how their attention was. It's odd because I want to say zero, because there was no concentration needed. And that sounds odd, but the routine was so dialed in, it became really natural. So I wasn't focusing on a return, though there wasn't a lot of focus or concentration at that point. It was just going through the motions that were already drilled in. And for me, that sort of relates this idea that the attention required in mindfulness is different to the attention required in flow. And that when you are in flow, it's back to that earlier question, it's almost a relaxed way of concentrating. It's more effortless.
Can I bring a question in, Derek?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
It's from Angela, and it's in relation to the difference between working with a disparate group of individuals or working with a team. And a question goes, Interski is a team activity, and building a team thing is important. Most of us have groups of individual learners, emphasis on individual. How important is aiding the development of team important for flow? Is it easier or more difficult with a bunch of individuals?
Question. I have to think about that for a little bit. I don't know. My experience of working with this team was it was quite challenging, and you'll see this from some of the other themes that come out. And I would say that the program very much helped to make the team come together, because I think otherwise it might not have happened, but I can't say that with any complete certainty. But yeah, certainly in a team situation, it's important that they bond and that they come together. I guess our challenge always when we're working with a group of individuals, and depending on the length of time you have those people in front of you or you're working with them, is going to greatly determine how much you can get done. So if you have people for a longer period of time, whether they're individuals or a team, then you have more chance to deal with their individual needs and to understand what makes them tick and whether you can trigger flow or not. So it's probably more down to duration, I would say, that you have with the learner. So there anything else at that point, Ian? Or?
One more, yeah. Are you aware of its use and success in other activities, for instance, aviation pilots focusing prior to an approach to an airport after a long transit and period of low arousal?
And that specific one I'm not sure about, but I do know, generally reading about flow and all the literature on it, it's been used in many different contexts and domains. So it's, and this is as far as I've been able to work out. I certainly haven't found any other specific literature which worked on flow and mindfulness in this way on alpine skiers, or any skiers actually. But yes, it has been used extensively across different areas of life, and probably less so on skiing. Okay, was there anything else, or will I crack on?
No, on you go.
Okay, cool. So second theme, usefulness and benefits of the mindfulness training. And, obviously the views from individuals vary quite considerably, as do their perception of usefulness. I would quite happily say, though, that everybody benefited from the activities to a greater or lesser extent. And one of the reasons I designed the program in the way I did, and to have 5 activities in each, in both the meditative and the communication activities, was because I knew myself that I found some of the activities more useful for me than others. And whenever we work with somebody, we know that some things are going to work better for some people than others. So having a range of activities there's more chance that you'll find ones that suit certain individuals. So another little quote here. I think it makes it realize a lot about yourself. So it's a bit of a self-development sort of program where you highlight your strengths and weaknesses in communication. So clearly referring to the communication activities, but the sort of self-development program was interesting because they were certainly thinking of it as something that helped them beyond just the training for interski itself. Okay. So then moving on to the next theme, 3, mindful awareness throughout the journey. This was quite key, and you'll see why it's key in a moment as I bring in the next theme. But it definitely, developing this ability to be mindful and to create awareness, gave them the opportunity, I say, to basically to pause and respond, and therefore make better decisions throughout the journey. Quite often people in our fast-paced lives, as I said before, would tend to react to things very quickly. Now, of course, there are times we need to react to things fast, but there are plenty of times we need to actually step back and think about what we're doing before we respond. So another nice couple of quotes here. I really like these ones. I was aware at times where I approached communication situations maybe not an ideal way. So that kind of led into using the tools slightly differently. And a beautiful one here, letting go of the fact that what I said was the only way, that my opinion, my thoughts were better than everyone else's. And that brings me into the next theme, because team bonding, if you can imagine bringing together the group of people that we had, you've got 10 alpine ski instructors, 9 males and 1 female, and it's not surprising that everybody is very experienced. There's a lot of knowledge. They can all ski to a really high level, and therefore they've become quite strong in their opinions, shall we just say. And so there was a real sort of sense of almost conflict at the beginning, I would say, where everybody was needing to put in their point of view and make sure that they were heard. So it was really important that they used this mindful communication activities particularly to try and help the dynamic of the team, and that definitely happened. And this one clearly here says, I was listening properly and more mindfully. because it's easy as coaches and instructors to be listening but not actually hearing. And I think that's one we could all, agree with, that it's very often we don't listen properly. So that was a massive one, really. So fifth theme, I hope you're all still with me at the moment. We're doing okay on time, I think, at the moment. So the mindfulness, as I said, was another way of letting people experience a whole range of emotions, and they definitely did experience all sorts, both in training and at the event. So it was a bit of a roller coaster. And there was all kinds of things, as you can see from the bottom there, from frustration, stress, tedium on the negative end, and then calmness, confidence, gratitude, compassion, enjoyment, etc. on the other end. So it's a whole range of emotions coming out. And going back to the mindful companions, which I had as one of the activities, that was a really interesting one, because some people were actually sort of feeling that they shouldn't be choosing some people to go up a lift with and not others, because maybe that wouldn't help the sort of bonding of the team. So, they shouldn't pick certain people and ignore other people. And I remember somebody quoted on that, and actually for me, that showed a real sense of being mindful awareness. The fact that they even made that decision, that they tried to go up with a range of people to help the bonding of the team. But there was other people that, I remember one quote that came out where somebody said they preferred to go up with certain people during the training camps, but other people during the event itself, because they got them into a different mind state, got them to experience different emotions, or emotions that they wanted to experience, depending on whether they were in the training situation or the event itself. So again, the mindfulness was allowing them to do that. Clearly, as I said, there was some, issues with some of the activities. So some questioned their value in certain contexts, and others. Some people found the activities were actually less useful in the snow sports environment, but very useful in their home life. Others found certain activities incredibly useful in the snow sports environment, and others not so useful. There was that sense of lack of time for some people as well, because you're busy in the winter season. But also on the training camps, there was 2 other coaches present as well, looking more at the technical and tactical side, and then there was me working on the sort of developing flow and mindfulness with the team. So there was a sense of that as well at times. And then clearly some people found some activities useful and others not so useful. Okay, so this is kind of how I summed up what the benefits of the training were. So the first thing was that the skill of focused attention was definitely one that improved over the time through using the program. And that was brought out primarily through the questionnaire, but also through some of the comments that came out. But other benefits that came from using the program were, it did show that the activities could be easily integrated into a pre-performance routine. And so they could perhaps be fitted in alongside other strategies, psychological strategies people might use. It showed how easy the activities could then be just adapted to other life contexts, so just day-to-day life. The one that came out that was massive from every person was they all talked about how important it was to properly listen. It also showed that association is key, so choosing your companions in both training situations and everyday life. And it showed that the activities themselves, I would say, provided a structure that allowed people, to be positively influenced on the whole social dynamic within the team, improved, and therefore creating unity, trust, and belief in each other. Again, as I said right from the start, maybe that would have happened without it, but the program provided that structure as to how to do that. Okay. Any other questions at this point, Ian? How are we doing?
No, Derek, just someone quoting the listening hearing comment, suggesting perhaps those words should be the other way around. I think we'd probably all agree that, yes, people listen, but maybe hear, but don't truly listen. So I think that comment was just someone raising that. It might
yeah, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Did we get a result on the second poll? I think you maybe did put it up, but I couldn't remember.
Yep, I'll just share it just now.
I probably wasn't paying attention at the time. So this was the one as to whether people had experienced flow before.
Yeah.
Okay, so, okay, a bit more on the yes there. So it looked like 64% yes, very small percent no, 6% no, and 31% not sure. Okay, so definitely a little bit more towards definitely experiencing it there. It's good. So we can get rid of that now. There we go. Okay, so we sort of shared the study with you, so let's look at what I believe the coaching implications are from the study, and see what people think. So my first implication is that if you use mindfulness, it does help create this kind of space so that people can choose and better respond in situations. So particularly in training, I would say that that's something that can be really useful for learners in many areas, that they have that ability to do that. The other suggestion that I say is that with the right kind of training, more flow can be experienced. I don't think there's a magic bullet. I don't think we can guarantee it, but I think we can facilitate the conditions that are more likely to encourage flow to happen. Attention itself, I would say, can definitely be trained and improved. It is a skill. And mindfulness provides one way of training attention, but again, there are other ways of training attention. And attention is both effortful and effortless, as I've said right from the start. So that's not a bad thing, that's more of an observation. And that would lead to me saying that, crucially, practicing effortful attention in mindfulness can lead to or encourage effortful attention or effortless attention in flow. Okay, so that's really what I would suggest are the key coaching implications. So again, if anybody has any thoughts straight away at this point.
There's a question, Derek, from Angela about the lasting benefits, and a question was simply, was there a follow-up at a later time to measure or see if those benefits had lasted?
No, there hasn't been. I think it would have been interesting to do something like that. Obviously, it wasn't within the sort of realm of my university course to do that, but I certainly would agree that having some kind of follow-up would be really useful to know whether the program had impacted people in their either in their Snowsports lives or their day-to-day lives beyond the Congress itself. It would certainly be worth doing something like that. And if people want to do more studies in this kind of area, it would be great, I think, just to know. I mean, that other research that's been done does suggest that people who experience flow on a regular basis, people who use mindfulness in whether it be meditative or just in their day-to-day lives, it definitely has an impact on mental health and well-being. And that was obviously, one of the things that I set out in the 3 steps to well-being document for Interski was this idea of learn it, love it, live it, which would incorporate this mindfulness and flow, could actually have a longer term beneficial impact for people.
Just a couple of others there, Derek, just a very positive comment saying that the term facilitate the conditions which allow more flow is a great phrase. Right, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, when I talk about that, if we break flow down, which I'm not really going to do tonight, but if you wanted to read up more about flow, and we also do some online workshops specifically about flow, which I'll just mention at the end.
but you can break flow down into what's called its foundations and its characteristics. And the characteristics are what you experience when you're in a flow state, and the foundations are what you can control as a coach. And if you can control those foundations, then you have more chance of people experiencing flow. But yes, it's a facilitation. It's not a guarantee, I would say. Yeah.
And then Simon asking if it can be achieved at different levels. So his question is, do you think flow can be achieved at any level of ability, beginner or experienced?
Yeah, another great question. You know, some brilliant questions coming out here, because the general thought process is that people with a higher skill level experience flow more frequently and more deeply. But it depends again in terms, because there's a number of different characteristics of flow. I would certainly say that you could experience some of those characteristics as a lower skill person. If you're still meeting some of the things I talked about earlier, like it's a challenging task, which is moving you out of your comfort zone and therefore requires your kind of really focused attention, then yes, I think people could experience flow. But I think the more high quality flow experiences happen when people are of a higher skill level.
So yeah, you created a bit of intrigue here. Question, can you give us a little bit of a flavor of some of the foundations?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about, so the challenge one, it's termed as being the challenge skills balance, which was the one I referred to earlier about Stephen Gotler talking about there being this 4% difference, which I'm not, I don't know, as I said, I don't know where that number came from, but it's this idea that there's the right balance between challenges, or the challenge provided, and the skills that the person has. And so that it's actually stretching their performance. And the other thing that needs to be there for people to experience flow is that they are able to get immediate ongoing feedback as they're actually performing the task. And that, for me, is one of the reasons why the lower skilled person may not be able to experience flow as easily, because as we know, when people are learning at the start, they tend to rely on, rightly or wrongly, a lot more extrinsic feedback from the coach or instructor. So when people have developed the skills to use feedback themselves from, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, etc., when they can use those sources in a better way, then and they become more skilled at that, then they can actually deal with the feedback as they're doing the activity. And then the other thing they definitely need is they need to have a goal. They need to have a clear goal as to what they're trying to achieve, and be able to adapt or change that goal while doing the task based on how well they're doing, which again brings us back to the feedback. So those are essentially the kind of foundations I'm talking about.
Question from James P, or an observation, I should say, that he's found that if someone has experienced flow in another sport or scenario, they can learn sport more rapidly by getting into that state.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, because again, they've probably, as I've just said there, they've become quite skillful in some of the skills, such as using feedback sources themselves from those other sports. So yes, I think then that's a transferable skill that they could take into another activity. So yeah, I think that's probably very true.
Yep, they're still coming thick and fast.
Yep.
Does coaching and athletic performance exist in a highly dynamic and complex space with multiple social and external influence? Did you see evidence in your study that flow was more likely in individuals who had less outside pressures and good social interconnection within the team?
Good question. Well, I like the less outside pressure thing, because one of the things that people talk about who experience flow is they're more intrinsically motivated. They're more doing the activity for its own sake, for the love of it, rather than for the external reward. So it really comes back to goal setting, and whether people can find reasons for doing the activity for themselves and for the love of it. If they do, then there's more chance that they they will experience flow. Whereas if they're trying to please others, or they're feeling that pressure from outside sources, then they're definitely less likely to experience flow.
Okay, and from Jeanette, have you produced guidelines on how to introduce meditative and communication activities within participants?
Yes, so I'll come to that in a moment. The program that I designed is freely available to people. So if you want to take that program, and I'll come to that in a moment, and it has within the program, that on the PDF file, it went through the sort of guidelines as to how to use each activity. Yeah.
Okay, and then the final one for the moment, how can you fit visualization techniques into mindfulness?
I think what I'd say though is, don't see mindfulness as replacing other techniques. I would say see it as working alongside other techniques. So I would say whether it's visualization, mental rehearsal, imagery, etc., all of those things can be done. You might use mindfulness in a way of getting yourself into a state of mind that allows you to then use visualization, for example. So it might be that one precedes the other. But as I said right from the outset, I'm not suggesting that I've given you something this evening that you should use at the expense of other things. It's an additional tool.
Okay, Derek, that's all the questions for the moment.
Okay, brilliant. I haven't got too much more anyway, so I'm coming back now to the slide I had at the start. So, and this is kind of my question now to everybody here this evening is can flowing with mindfulness, based on what I've presented to you this evening, do you think it can contribute in some way to some of these aims that we got from the previous two sessions that I've been involved with? So Russell Earnshaw's creative coaching. So, if you think about the things he said there, building people's confidence, helping them grow as individuals, being part of a team, belonging and connection. So do we think that there's anything in what I've presented tonight that could help any of that? Then obviously Chris McKinnon's session on transformational coaching, those outcomes of performance, participation, personal development. Again, do we think that using this kind of a strategy would in some way work towards those? I think we're going to have a final poll question around that. I don't know if you want to put that one in at this point, Niamh.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, do you think that the mindfulness training strategies, such as the one presented this evening, provide a useful addition to your coaching tools? So we can have a look at the results of that in a moment. Again, it could be yes, no, maybe. And so my invitation to you is, if you'd like to, you can access this training program. You can do so from the Parallel Dreams Coaching Academy website on our Learning Hub, and there's a Documents and Tools tab, and you can go on. And once you register on the site, you can then get access to the program, download the two PDF documents with the meditative and the communication activities. And if you want to adapt it in some way, because it might not particularly suit your own context or environment, but you might be able to use it as a structure and adapt it. All I'd say is just acknowledge the source if you're doing that. But I'd be really interested to hear from people if they find that something that's useful over the coming winter. We hope we'll all be actually managing to ski somewhere this winter. I think for us, we'll be managing to ski. We just might not have any clients. Right here. Okay, so it looks like, all right, interesting results. Is that the results then, Niamh?
Yeah, that's the results, yeah.
Yeah. So 84% saying yes to it, and 16% going for maybe. Sounds pretty good. So there might be something in it, hopefully. Let's close that down. Okay, so are there any further questions at this point about the research, just anything general? Any other ones in there?
Nothing else at the moment, Derek.
Nothing at the moment. Okay. Well, just keep thinking about it. While you're thinking about if there's any other questions, then I'll just move on. So a bunch of references here just that I've used. So I think we'll make these slides available, won't we, afterwards, Ian, to everybody? Yep. So if you are interested, there's a few, you can see one of the first books that Csikszentmihalyi brought out was right back in 1975. Probably the one that's been read the most is the second one there, the 1990 Psychology of Optimal Experience. And then Finding Flow is another one. The one that he wrote with Susan Jackson in 1999, Flow in Sports, is really good and well worth a look. And a much more recent one, which is also very good, is Running Flow, Mental Immersion Techniques for Better Running, which Csikszentmihalyi was also involved in. So certainly recommend some of those if people want to read more. Then as I said before, we've introduced some of this into the literature or into the materials for the Irish Association of Snowsports Instructors. So it's in some of our manual chapters. Ellen Langer, who I talked about going for the mindful learning approach, she's got a good book there on mindful learning. And then my own dissertation is amongst all that stuff there at the end. So if anybody does want to find out more about my dissertation, actually read some of the 100 and so odd pages of it, then I would be happy to send it to you, but you could just maybe email me personally if you're interested in doing that. I think a couple of people on the call tonight, Sharon, I don't know if Louise is on the call, but I know a couple of people have received the dissertation. I don't know how much of it you've managed to read, but I know you have looked at it.
Couple of questions, Derek.
Yeah, go for it.
So your research was clearly with adults. What about children?
Yeah, I think it would be a good thing to do it with kids as well. I chose adults. I suppose I chose my research because it fitted in with what was happening for me at the time. And I guess before I used the team, I had thought about doing it with ski instructors who were training for their next level of exam, because that's, again, what I've been involved in a lot. But it would be really interesting to use this type of program with children of varying ages, because a lot of my colleagues or cohort on the master's program were developing mindfulness type activities for use in primary schools. So clearly there's ways of designing programs that are catered towards the younger generation.
Okay, and then James P asking, which tab within the Learning Hub is the mindfulness handout you talked about?
It's the documents one. So it just says documents and tools. Just click on that, and you just have to do a quick registration, and then you'll get that.
And then a question about your thoughts on the application to a recreational setting.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I have been running last winter what I've called, intro flow performance days with people. So that's been very much aimed at the recreational setting. So yeah, I think it can certainly work, giving people an understanding of what flow is and what particularly its characteristics are. Then they can get an understanding of whether they have experienced those things before or not. So that, it's clearly something anyone can experience. But if you have the time with people, then it's certainly more likely to happen. It's always harder if I have a one-off lesson with somebody, then there's a limit to what you can do.
James P asking again, books and ebooks, documents and tools, pre-workshop learning or post-workshop growth. I think he's still looking for the
yeah, it's the documents and tools one. I did see a site remember request just come in there, so that might have been him.
Yeah,
but I'll need to deal with those anyway afterwards if they've come in. So
yeah.
But yes, it's the documents and tools tab.
Just a couple of comments. someone as a PE teacher looking forward to introducing this to their primary ones.
Okay, yeah.
And from Angela again about children, it might be easier to nudge the comfort zone in children and early adult learners.
Yeah, possibly, because there's less fear and anxiety amongst certainly the younger generations. So they're probably more willing to take the challenges that you present for them, I would say. Yeah. And there are some, as I said, some of my colleagues came up with some great sort of mindfulness stuff. There's a program called Amazing Me, which is very much aimed at primary school children. Again, I could try and I'll put some of these links together maybe for people.
Yep.
So yeah, there's plenty of stuff, good stuff out there.
Well, Derek, there are a couple of other comments, but they're just sort of slightly passing comments. No disrespect meant to those about, the fact we have very short lifts and it might be slightly different. But fundamentally, I'd just like to say thank you, Derek. That was really interesting. And on behalf of everyone, thank you for making the time. If everyone would like to just put some comments in the chat, it's very helpful because we can look at that afterwards. If you found it useful, interesting, any observations, any comments at all, that'd be great. Feel free to unmute as well if you'd like to.
I'm just going to bring up here that there's, if people do want to engage a bit more in the flow stuff, we have these workshops, and the way we're running those workshops is they're very small groups, so they're very interactive. People share their own experiences, so it's more of a discussion like we might have in a classroom. It is virtual, obviously, as everything is these days. But if you want to look at flow more, then they're on the website as well, the online workshops. And the third, they kind of follow each other in order, with the third one looking at how flow fits into the bigger picture of mental health and well-being.
8 and 5.
Okay.
Brilliant. Derek, thank you very much. And for
Pleasure.
interested, next week we have 3 sessions on. Do please have a look at the summit sessions schedule to get the detail there. We'd very much like to see everyone then. But again, thanks very much everyone for making the time this evening. I think Derek might have won the bet. We had a guess at the start as to how many participants. I went for 55. I think Niamh went for, what did you go for?
I went for 46. So I was close.
Derek went for
45, I think.
45.
And we've got 40.
We were 45. Bang on.
Bang on.
Oh, wow.
Derek wins the drinks. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Derek.
Okay, thank you very much. Brilliant.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derek.
Pleasure.
Thanks.